When I say Castlevania, some may see imagery of whips, muscle-bound Van Helsing types, classic Universal-inspired horror icons, and hard-as-nails 80s platforming. But in the modern era, what defines the franchise's identity is Symphony of the Night. A game that not only sold the best in the series' history, but changed the face of Castlevania. For many, Symphony of the Night is synonymous with the Metroidvania genre. The phrase is a common gaming term that describes a subgenre that sets its focus on exploring a large map, and through discovery of new equipment, power-ups, abilities, and secrets, the player is able to open up the map more, backtracking to unexplorable locations, becoming familiar to the world as they progress. However, placing Symphony into a blanket term that paints it as a Metroid game ignores the influences and design of Koji Igarashi and his team. With Metroid games, there are 3 core concepts. You are discovering new locations, obstacles blocking your progress, and secrets hidden in the game world. You traverse the world through precise platforming and mastery of the controls at hand. This is a key component to acquiring bigger rewards and succeeding against bosses, eventually being able to sequence break the game through advanced platforming methods such as morph ball jumping, shine sparks, and wall jumps. Lastly, you make progress through upgrades given to you throughout the game. Not only does Samus's power increase through every upgrade, but the world itself opens up to the player. The one core concept that both these games share is discovery. One of Iga's main inspirations for Symphony of the Night was the design of the Zelda series, which focuses on player exploration. It leads you to discovering secrets, dungeons, and items for your own ambition. The more you explore, the more you succeed. Zelda 2 notably added more traditional RPG elements to the game, as well as changing to a side-scrolling perspective, giving more emphasis towards combat. Castlevania 2 integrated these ideas. In turn, when you look at Symphony of the Night, it follows this lineage with the same kind of mechanics. Unlike Metroid, Symphony wants you to take your time and discover the dark secrets of the castle. While Metroid gives you the best ending for finishing the game quick, Symphony expects you to have explored every room in the castle. Platforming isn't a focus. In fact, it removes the Castlevania series staples, like instant kill death pits, locking you on stairs, fall damage, a timer, and precision platforming as a whole. Looking from this perspective, Metroid is closer to a classic Castlevania game than Symphony of the Night is. You could then say that Symphony of the Night is a reimagining of Castlevania 2. Castlevania 2 is notorious for its poor execution of these concepts, like the secrets, 2's biggest drawback. Symphony takes these elements and refines them, making an action-adventure style Castlevania that works. It rewards you the longer you play due to its leveling up and equipment that affects the challenge of combat. Leveling encourages the player to fight rather than run. The more you fight, the more your confidence as a player increases, and the more you level. The more you level, the more you want to explore the castle, leading you to fiercer enemies. There's a variety of options presented to the player with the combat. Secondary items that use hearts, drinking potions can buff stats or create immunities, equipping different gear to make Alucard more of a powerhouse, obtaining relics giving you more offensive options, or revealing information. Familiars offer different methods of support, and you can even discover special commands that unleash powerful spells. These options give the player a large amount of freedom and let the game be whatever the player wants it to be, both in challenge and player expression. The bosses are themselves a stamp on this freedom, as you can defeat every boss in a multitude of ways. Iga himself states that every boss was designed so that you can defeat them without taking a single hit. It's entirely possible to play through the game with minimal leveling and equipment, as many of the bosses that require more advanced strategies are entirely optional. The combat within Castlevania fuels the bosses themselves, as they are impactful moments of the game that leave an impression. While you can fly over most enemy encounters in the game, The bosses are unavoidable. They amplify Symphony's spectacle. That spectacle is a driving part of the franchise. From as early as Super Castlevania 4, you can see the series demonstrating the potential of hardware upgrades. Rondo of Blood treats its boss fights as a benchmark of the game's capabilities. The opening battle with Death in particular utilizes multiple layers of parallax scrolling and showcasing incredible sprite work. Symphony of the Night takes these boss encounters and supercharges them. What once took place on a single screen now can be on several, with bosses towering over Alucard. The game's opening with Dracula creates a bold statement from Symphony that this game is bigger than anything you've played in the past, beginning with the final boss from the previous game. The first enemy you encounter in the main castle is a large wolf that explodes in a burst of flames, an effect typically kept for bosses in previous games is now placed on a standard enemy. The environments show off a large amount of detail, utilizing 3D polygons to merge with elements of the backgrounds or objects in the field to create more of a sense of depth. Some rooms will have multiple layers of parallax scrolling, far beyond what Rondo of Blood would have been capable of. All this new tech is running at a consistent frame rate of 60 FPS, which would have been impossible on any previous hardware. Due to the PlayStation 1 CD space, it was entirely possible to fit a wider variety of music and voice acting, something that was still in its infancy on consoles and was definitely not associated with sprite-based games. The dub itself has its fans, but much of Igarashi's script loses its meaning and the game's narrative becomes difficult for the player to take seriously.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you!
In the Japanese version, this is not at all an issue, as professional, well-established voice actors were cast for the roles. Many reprised their roles in future games. Bringing in an all-star cast shows that Igarashi was serious about the story. While Rondo of Blood also has its own cutscenes, putting an emphasis on narrative, Symphony goes one step beyond in making the narrative a real feature of the game. Symphony uses its storytelling to make further efforts to break away from the series' formula. Rather than the cookie-cutter, kill the bad guy, save the world scenario that frequents the series, Symphony is more of a character drama. It paints Dracula as a sympathetic villain. With the Belmont family pushed to the side, now corrupted and under Dracula's command, the focus instead shifts to Alucard, the troubled, stoic protagonist that has a more personal relationship with Dracula. Alucard is a drastic change in the series' protagonist. Gone are the macho, whip-wielding, Frank Frazetta-style Belmonts, and in its place, the more regal, refined, effeminate Dhampir. His design is shrouded with an otherworldly mystique that implies his vampiric heritage without explicitly stating it. When Alucard moves, he glides with a grace unseen amongst the heavy stomps of the Belmont clan in previous games. His strikes show more precision, and his unique abilities such as being able to transform into a bat or mist creates a main protagonist unlike any other in the series' history. Alucard's unique and elegant style is thanks to Ayami Kojima. She became the character designer for most of the series onwards. Her intricate, soft-edged painting style mixed with shoujo techniques makes her work feel like a lucid dream. Her illustrations perfectly capture the gothic themes of the franchise more so than ever before. Another key element to Symphony of the Night style is Michiru Yamane's compositions. The soundtrack has a variety of styles and creates an atmosphere. Where the previous games were more punchy, energetic, catchy melodies, Symphony settles for a more appropriate, thematic soundtrack which fits with the overall tone of the game's visual style and narrative. The closest you get to a classic Castlevania sound is in the prologue, where you play as a Belmont. With how different Symphony of the Night is, you could state the game design as anti-Castlevania. But why were Konami so lenient with Igarashi and his team, especially when this game was part of a flagship franchise for the brand? It's because the game was originally a spin-off with a small team, and Konami's focuses were on other 3D projects like Metal Gear and Castlevania 64. The team had a lot of freedom to do whatever they wanted over a 2-year development. Decisions that seem like risks for the franchise, the uses of sprites over 3D polygons, hiding a second half of the game that was unlikely to be found by players during their first playthrough, and shifting the overall design and style of Castlevania so drastically, were intended for a side project. Whether this was an intentional risk or merely an oversight from Konami and the programmers, we may never know. Regardless, Symphony of the Night is a classic of the era that has achieved the legendary status in gaming history. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Symphony, and it's unfortunate that such a revered game has no definitive version that is easily accessible to modern players. You can find the PlayStation 1 original through online markets, however you could be looking at some heavy figures. If you somehow own a Saturn, a port exists with some extra features such as new music and extra playable characters, although this version is very shoddy and it's a Japanese exclusive. Ports of the PS1 version are available for download on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, definitely the easiest way to get the game legally. Lastly, there exists a version hidden within Dracula X Chronicles for PSP and Vita. This version is completely redubbed,
Dracula, die now and leave this world.
And even has an option to play the game with the original Japanese voice actors. It includes the Japanese exclusive familiars Half Fairy and Nose Demon, as well as a playable Maria. It's appealing to be able to play Symphony of the Night handheld, yet few people own a PSP or Vita. It's a shame Konami hid the best way to play Symphony as a bonus in an obscure portable game. Is Symphony of the Night the best Castlevania? That depends on what you're looking for in a Castlevania game. The design of Symphony, compared to its predecessors, is fundamentally different, so trying to compare them is redundant. Symphony is not entirely perfect, and it has its shortcomings. The dub causes the game's narrative to feel too awkward for a player to take seriously. Dracula X does fix this, but that is not the version most gamers will experience. A huge drawback for any player will be how long it takes to reload after death. The entire process takes roughly a minute to get back into the game. Save stations are a harsh enough punishment, without losing an extra minute for every time you die.
何だったんだろう結局あまり考えてなかったんだと思います
The reverse castle is an iconic moment of the game, although it's clear the castle wasn't designed to be played upside down. Many of the rooms require you to turn into a bat to actually traverse, and the map has no direction. It's unclear where exactly you're supposed to be going, or what exactly is required of you to fight Dracula and beat the game. The difficulty spikes hard when it comes to the new enemies, and their placements start to feel cheap. They don't really complement the new level design. Creating a mental route to Dracula becomes frustrating since the game fails to nudge the player towards the right destinations. To gain the best ending, you need 196% map completion, which is very awkward to get in the upside down castle, since the way the map works, player placement needs to be strangely precise, making the task feel clumsy. Despite these shortcomings, the game still holds up, more so than other classics of the era. Igarashi and his team truly made a masterpiece, and it's no surprise that his style became the staple of the modern-day Castlevania. Iga coined the term Igavania to describe this type of game, which is what I shall be referring these games as from now on. This raises a more fitting question. Is Symphony of the Night the best Igavania game? That's what I plan to find out as I explore every Igavania leading up to the release of Bloodstained. Join me next time when we explore the Circle of the Moon.